everyone. I'm David Hazony, Director and Steinhardt Senior Fellow at the Z3 Institute, and I'm really excited to have with me Rabbi David Gedzelman. He's the CEO and President of the Steinhardt Foundation for Jewish Life. Um, let's dive right in because we have so much has happened since you wrote this amazing essay that appears in this book, Jewish Priorities. The essay is called Teach the Idea of the Jewish People. And what it does is it sets up there are two different parts to it, but let's start with the part that I think is most urgent, most relevant. We've been seeing what's going on American campuses, and everybody's talking about the encampments and the demonstrations and how Jewish students feel. And then we're talking about the administrations and what they're doing about it or not doing about it. But there's not so much conversation about classes and faculty and content that is being taught that some would say is also quite anti-Semitic, anti-Israel, and hostile in many, many different fields. So you wrote this essay about what's happening to the concept of the Jewish people in universities, in the content, in the classrooms. And I thought, this would be a great thing to talk about, especially now that the campuses have kind of blown up and the issue of anti-Semitism is very powerful. So maybe talk a little bit about what you discovered when you looked into it.
Thanks, David. First of all, thank you for having me today. It's a pleasure to have this conversation. In this essay, and as you know very well, I wrote this in 2022, and it was published in October 2023, and it was, I think, very relevant, and has been. In the essay, I want to uncover the degree to which we have been or have not been educating our young people about the very idea of the Jewish people, the very idea of what animates Jewish peoplehood. And I conducted between 20 and 30 interviews of senior Jewish educators, deans of schools of education, to understand is the very concept of what the Jewish people is in the context of Jewish wisdom and Jewish life and Torah, is it taught? Is it explored for younger Jews in America? And what I learned was that it basically isn't. And so the relevance of that to the university setting.
Wait, before we get to universities, I have to jump in.
Yeah.
When you say it basically isn't, what is it? Just flesh that out a little bit, because I assumed, I mean, the Jewish people is kind of a foundation of Jewish identity, right? It's throughout the Bible, it's throughout the tradition, it's in all of our rituals. Like we're constantly talking about Am Israel or Bnei Israel or all these different terms talking about the Jewish people. So when you say it's not taught in Jewish educational settings for kids or for youth, what do you mean exactly? Like not at all?
So the Jews are referenced, I believe, but the essence of what it means to be a Jew that is conveyed and taught is that it's belonging to a faith community, a religion that has rituals and texts and ancient stories, but very little emphasis on exploring, like, who are the Jews? What is, how does it function in, even in the religious context? Because American Jews are in an overall dominant culture that defines religion as theologically based and basically peopleless. Um, and we have such rich sources and ideas about the this idea that puts together being born into a people and being able to choose to be part of this people, between a connection which is about familial identity and family connection, and about religion and faith. And it's not one or the other, it's both in our sources. And that actually can yield tremendous richness and power, but we don't do it. Um, and if you ask American Jews, what does it mean to be Jewish? And you say religion, they say, yeah, yeah, it's my religion. And are you religious? No, not particularly. Now, we know from the Birthright data and the Birthright experience that when young American Jews get to Israel on the Birthright trip, they really wake up to the fact like, oh, wow, this is my extended family. This is my people. I'm part of the Jewish people. Now, are they given tools to further explore that, to see how the moment of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of coming out of Egypt, is is a peoplehood family-based experience, and that in the future, the Torah says in Exodus 12, that you're going to do this thing in every generation, every year. You're gonna get this lamb and you're gonna sacrifice it, and you're gonna uh, uh, roast it whole, and you're going to eat it together, right? The Korban Pesach. And v'chi agorit chager v'asa Pesach Lashem. And if a non-Jew, a stranger, is living by you and wants to do this too, let him do it. But they have to be circumcised. Himo lo kol zachar, which means they have to show that they're gonna they're gonna do something very profound to join you and be part of this thing. Not just an easy, I believe and I'm there. No, they have to do something really powerful. They have to join their blood to your blood, and but they can join you. You're born into it, but others can join it, and not just join it in a whimsical way, but join it very profoundly and with doing something pretty intense.
So basically, what you're saying is that these kids go to Hebrew school or go to or day school or whatever Jewish experiences they have, and they're not ever really forced to directly deal with this concept. They think it's a faith community. They think that we're Jewish because that's kind of what you're supposed to believe in. And it's only later when they get, say, they go on Birthright, they get to Israel, and then boom, all of a sudden, it turns out that their faith has nothing to do practically with their direct bond with all of these Israelis or with all the other kids who are traveling with them. There's some other bond that we call peoplehood that includes faith but isn't necessarily limited by it,
Yeah,
right?
not that it has nothing to do with it, it has everything to do with it, but that it's something, it's in a different category of groupness, of belonging to an identity. It's just in a different category from what they had thought. Now, they also always had a feeling in their kishkas that this is about my family somehow, but no language to articulate it, no knowledge of sources, no sense of what you know really is. And again, it's not in our sources. It's not that's not limited just to what you're born into. It has this other component of people being able to join it, and they're both there. And if you can't function with two ideas at the same time, you can't entertain dialectical thinking, then you're going to be very uncomfortable with the two aspects of this being co-equal. You're going to say, no, no, it's either like this ethno thing or it's the religion. But
So how did this happen? How is it possible that like American Jews who have been in America in large numbers for more than a century, built schools, built all kinds of educational constructs, you know, trained educators, did they just forget that we're also people? Did they think did they think it was so self-evident that it didn't need to be taught, or did they think that their parents would teach them, or did they just, or was there something deliberate about it?
I think the Eastern European immigrant populations knew very well that they're part of the Jewish people. The leadership in the Jewish community um, made an assessment that Jewish safety, and I mean in the very early part of the 20th century, that Jewish safety and opportunity in America would depend on us telling the dominant culture we're just a faith community. So much so that the American Jewish Committee, which was very dominant in the Jewish community, in 1910 wrote a brief to the U.S. Immigration Commission protesting that under nationality in immigration forms, Jews were being called Jewish there, or what they were really doing was taking whatever it said in what was the documentation from the Russian Empire, or even on the ship manifest, where it was Hebrew or it was Jewish in that documentation, and the AJC protested that you can't call us a nationality. Jews are not a nationality. And in that document, they say we're not a nationality, we're not a people, we are a faith community.
Wow.
And the problem is that we believed our own lie. Now, the First Amendment of the Constitution of the United States doesn't protect language groups. It doesn't protect uh, um, uh, uh, cultures, peoples. It protects religion. Um, Now, we've had some developments since then. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act is now understood as protecting, what your national origin is, and that gets extended to Jews just very recently. But in 1910, there were no constitutional rights afforded to an American on the basis of their sense of peoplehood and that kind of belonging. Religion, absolutely. So let's play it safe and let's argue that we're just a religion and therefore we're protected. Again, we that generation, and the whole generation of people who came to the United States until the gates were closed by the Reed-Johnson Immigration Act in 1924, um, they all knew that they're part of the Jewish people. And by the way, the biggest Jewish organizations and ways of communal structure organizing weren't synagogues in 1924. They were the fraternal organizations. They were B'nai B'rith, and they were the Arbiter Rank and all that kind of stuff. Really extensive, much bigger than shuls, because remember, the vast majority of Eastern European Jews who came before the war came in basically revolt to rabbinic authority in Eastern Europe. The most rabbinic authority, posting, rabbis, Orthodox rabbis said, don't go to that trade from Medina. They also said, don't go to Eretz Yisrael with the Zionists. Um, they said, just stay right here, and we'll all just march to the slaughter together. I mean that's a whole piece of Jewish history that people need to look at. But so the Eastern European immigrants who came before the war weren't especially interested in being that religious, even before they came to the United States.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, I'm not saying they were, a bunch of rebels completely against anti-religious, but their sense of Jewish peoplehood belonging was very dominant. But that only lasted a certain amount of time, and by the time I was growing up in the 1970s, the 60s and 70s, we were told by the dominant culture, by our families, that it's just a religion. and
So,
and also, yeah.
so okay, so we have an entire generation. Let's fast forward a little bit to our own time. We have an entire generation that has sort of inherited this big fat lacuna in their Jewish educational structures,
Yeah.
and then they get to college, and some of them even want to study Jewish studies because that's what that's what they want to pursue. What do they encounter there when it comes to the Jewish people?
um what they encounter there is an ideology, not by everybody, but there's a very strong ideology. We call them the modernist scholars of nationalism, Hobsbawm and Benedict Anderson, um, who teach that the idea of Jewish peoplehood is a modern construct that was created to serve the interests of political Zionism. And that before the modern era, Jews didn't have this idea of being part of a people. It was just, they were co-religionists. I mean, it's so disproved by every piece of of Jewish sources, literature, legal documents.
Wait, so I remember once reading a book by Shlomo Sand. I think he wrote a book called The Invention of the Jewish People. And
yeah,
it was just preposterous, right? It was like anybody who had ever actually studied any Jewish sources from any period in our history instantly knew that it was baloney. But what I didn't know at the time, and maybe it wasn't even true yet, was that you're saying that this approach, this totally false history of the concept of the Jewish people, has become dominant in fields of academia.
it's very it's very prominent. Um, so much so that a person, Noam Pianko, who had been the president of the Association of Jewish Studies, HAS, wrote a book called Jewish Peoplehood and American Innovation, uh,
Okay.
and which he correctly identifies that the word peoplehood is a new word. That Mordechai Kaplan didn't invent the English word peoplehood. It was developed in a different context, but he adapted it to the idea of the Jewish people and championed Jewish peoplehood and actually made a decision at a certain point that people is a better word than nation, because the word nation elicits accusations of dual loyalty, because nation can be both political and cultural. But people and peoplehood is something that Mordecai Kaplan championed, and Bianco identifies this correctly, but he uses it to argue that the Jews weren't a people in the modern sense. Um, and I would argue that
It's a bit of a leap.
I think it's a bit of a leap. I mean, he also does a bunch of other things. He says that the law of return is Nazi, is racist because it's based on you know one quarter Jewish identity. Well, hello, the Nazis, one quarter Jewish lineage, one Jewish grandparent was infected you, was enough to make you tainted and worthy of slaughter. And in the law of return, three-quarters non-Jewish lineage doesn't hurt you at all. Okay, so one quarter is enough to redeem you. So it's
It was
completely different.
deliberate, a deliberate play on or response
Yeah,
to the
to
Nuremberg.
overturn it, to turn it
Yeah.
around, to not be racialist in it.
So, but it can't be that Noam Pianko and Shlomo Sand and all these people are just don't know the history. Like they're not that they're smart people, right? What are they trying to achieve by essentially building a false scholarship uh, uh, thesis that says that something that every Jew, first of all, every Jew over the age of, say, 70, but also every Jew who's studied, even if he's 12 and he's studied texts, knows to be false.
Who
What was
says
he trying to accomplish?
who says Hamvarechet Amo Yisrael b'Shalom, daily, multiple times a day, who recites in the liturgy Asher Bachar Banu Mikol Ha'amim. I mean, so much. So, of course, anyone knows that, but I believe
I mean,
that what this
maybe
is.
the word peoplehood was invented in America because prior to being in America, Jews didn't speak English. So they needed
That's
a word in
that's part
English.
that's part of it too. Although there's been a struggle to create a word in Hebrew for it.
Oh God, yes. I just gave a talk that
Ami
happened.
Amiyut is the word that was,
Yeah.
approved by the Academia Lashon Ivrit, but I've argued to them that they should use the word umatiyut with an aleph. But anyway, I believe that this is basically an assault on Zionism,
Okay,
and
explain that.
eh, so it's a way of saying that Zionism is not a realization of anything historical or ancient or legitimate historically. That Zionism is just another invention of this nationalist cancer that has infected the whole world, and starting with European nationalism, and and the Jews never were people. So so and that is so flawed, but it helps us understand that anti-Zionism, implicitly and explicitly, is based on a doctrine that negates the very idea of the Jewish people. And therefore, anti-Zionism, especially now after the creation of the State of Israel, and in a reality in which there's 7 million Jews living in the State of Israel, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
And ideologically, at its core, it's anti-Semitism. It is tantamount to intellectual genocide. It is a way of intellectually wiping out a people.
It's funny because we're talking about these scholars in a might be a pretty specific field or set of fields, but I encountered the same thing in a totally different field in archaeology. Now, and I'm not a archaeologist, but there was a period about 25 years ago that I got deeply into the whole question of biblical archaeology, and I did it because there was this big cover story in the Haaretz weekend supplement that said, "Truth from the Holy Land. After 100 years of digging, it turns out the biblical story never happened." Okay, that was the headline. And then you go into it, and what they're really saying is they're uncovering the work of this major archaeologist by the name of Israel Finkelstein.
Yeah, the minimalists. Yeah,
Right. So he developed this whole theory that basically said all the stuff that we've found in the ground that we say is from the time of King David and King Solomon is really 200 years later. And King David, we have no archaeological evidence that he even existed, and if he did exist, he was, quote, a hilltop chieftain. And there was this big explosive fight in the field of archaeology, which he didn't end up becoming dominant, at least not within Israeli archaeology. But it was clear that it was coming from the exact same place, this desire to strip Zionism of any claim to being attached to something ancient. Um, and like I don't get it. Like it's anybody who studies like let's just take, the history of Herzl and the Zionist Congress and the Uganda plan. Okay, like Herzl didn't create a state in Uganda because the majority of the people there in the Zionist Congress were from Eastern Europe, and we'll get back to Zionist Congresses in just a minute. Um, and they were just like, no, if we're going to leave and build a movement, let's go to our ancient homeland in the land of Israel. And they insisted on it. And because he was afraid it was going to tear the movement in half, he ended up backing down on the plan. So, like, to say that there wasn't any peoplehood connection to the land, that Zionism was just this thing that he pulled out of his pocket in order to expand colonialist, racist, whatever, the
you're a European presence in the
European
Middle
presence
East,
and so
right?
forth.
Yeah.
Like, and so now these kids get to university and they're bombarded by protests. And they're like, this is all after now we're after October 7th. And you're saying that you had just written October 7th comes, you've written this monumental essay about peoplehood, the failure of Jewish education, and the fact that universities are sharply uh, um, uh, engineered to take their ignorance about Jewish peoplehood and turn it into antipathy towards Jewish peoplehood, to fill that vacuum with falsehoods. How did you feel when you saw all this erupting at the same time?
Well, I knew where the anti-Zionist ideology was coming from. I knew how dangerous it is and false to the very idea of the Jewish people. And so I felt prepared for it. But I don't think our community was prepared for it. And our community is not prepared for it because we have willingly participated in abdicating our responsibility to teach this very rich and powerful aspect and foundation of who we are. Um, so what 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 I understood at that point was that we were in need of what I'm calling for in this essay, even more than ever. Um, um, our kids, our kids need to be taught and to be exposed to the ideas of their wisdom tradition, which basically shows that even all the religious structures and the spiritual discipline and the kind of spiritual prescriptions of our tradition, the medium, the laboratory in which those ideas are realized through action, through mitzvah, is the Jewish people.
Mm.
It doesn't just happen individuals on their own doing Jewish. It happens in community, and it happens in a community that is that constitutes family, community, people, constitutes the Jewish people. And the Jewish people is the medium by which the mitzvah is implemented in order to realize the values of Torah. I believe. Now, I say that also knowing that there are Jews who, not religious, but can be very much part of the Jewish people. But if Judaism is only a religion, if being Jewish is only a religion, then it's much more limited um, than what peoplehood is about. So I'll say that being Jewish is about being part of a people that has a religion, not about being part of a religion that has people.
Right, and we know this from the stories themselves. We know this from the Torah itself. We know that Moses doesn't show up to Mount Sinai all alone. He shows up with a people that already pre-existed before the revelation, and we know that all the sort of prototypical convert to Judaism, who is Ruth the Moabite, right, converts to Judaism through this one line where she says, "Your people is my people, and your God is my God."
Right. People
And she
comes
says it,
before
and she
God.
says it in that order. And I think that,
Right.
and again, it's not just the
And
Bible
and 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 she's the great grandmother of who?
of King
Of
David,
King David.
right?
I mean,
I'll
that
tell you
is
what,
so purposeful in that text.
you
That
know,
is so dramatic. I mean, there's other things in that text in the book of Ruth that are so powerful. I think another
yeah,
point in that book that's so powerful is the moment where Boaz realizes that it's Ruth who's sitting at his feet at the threshing floor. The language in Hebrew is Vayehi b'chatzi halayla, was in the middle of the night. And at that moment, he said, "Who are you?" And she says, "You are my redeemer. You're my goel." And she's using the word redeemer the way it's meant in the book of Deuteronomy to mean a personal redeemer who gets you out of your financial straits, who, if you become destitute, makes you okay, returns your ancestral land to you. That's a redeemer. It's a very personal thing, and it's about justice in the societal context. But that language of when this all becomes clear, and she tells him, I'm your, you're my redeemer. One other time in the entire Hebrew Bible that we have the language Vayehi b'chatzi alayla, and you know what that is. We're having this conversation right before Pesach. It's in Shemot. It's in Exodus. It's at the moment of Makat Bechorot, of the slaying of the firstborn, in order for the Jewish people to come out of Egypt. It's national redemption, right? So you have the goel of personal, individual, interrelational redemption, and you have the geula of national redemption, and you can't have one without the other.
Well,
Okay?
look, I think it's clear that we didn't go through leave Egypt, go through the desert, and then conquer the promised land. And then King David, built his kingdom and the temple. We didn't do all that for a faith community, right? We did that for a nation, for a people.
We did it for faith, but faith again. These it's a dialectic.
Right.
It is a faith community, and it's a people.
Right.
And that's the hard thing also to teach in America or anywhere these days, is that people don't like binaries. People don't like the dialectical process of seeing ideas in relationship to each other. They just want one or the other.
Right.
They
Like in sports, right? Right. In sports, Americans always have to have like one champion in each sport. They have like the season, and then they have playoffs, and then they have the finals, and then it's over. And then you go to Europe, and all of a sudden there's like soccer, which has like you can win the league, and then there's the Champions League, and then there's the national teams, and there's like five different ways to win. And for Americans, it's completely confusing because and the same with politics, right? You have this parliamentary system. In America, it's just like winner take all. Either you win or
right.
you lose. There's no in betweens.
Yeah, and no in betweens. And this either or approach, I think it's antithetical to what Jewish wisdom is really about. And so we stand in that tension in being Jews in America. I think it means that we have much to teach our
Yeah.
fellow Americans. We have much to give so that we can get rid of these false binaries. Um, so, so the real challenge then is being able to illustrate that you can have two things in a paradoxical relationship with each other at the heart of your own self-identity. That is a challenge. By the way, in my essay, I also talk about another false binary in the world of education. The cutting edge in the world of education is you shouldn't teach young people any facts or any knowledge based, cognitive. It's all emotional. It's all experiential. Well, I love emotional and experiential, but I also love facts and knowledge. Why does it have to be one or the other? Like, do both. You know, um, uh, that's a whole other false binary that we have to push up against.
Yeah. I want to shift gears for a minute. Um, your name appears at the top of a list um, that is running in an election for the Zionist Congress that Herzl started. But I don't think people know what it's really about, because I see ads like on social media. Hey, I'm running on this list, and hey, I'm running on that list. Come and vote. And I don't understand. Can you explain what this is actually about? Because it's very.
Yeah,
Are you running for office? Is that what's
I'm
happening?
running for Congress, for the World Zionist
You heard it here
Congress.
first.
So I lead a slate called The Jewish Future. We're number 20. And the World Zionist Congress elections in the United States Jewish community happen every 5 years. There's a World Zionist Congress that meets every 5 years. It sets the direction of the national institutions of the Zionist movement. Those national institutions include the World Zionist Organization, the Keren Kayemet L'Yisrael, which gets translated as Jewish National Fund, but not to be confused with Jewish National Fund Organization in the United States, the Sochnut, the Jewish Agency for Israel. And those institutions, especially the Keren Kayemet L'Yisrael, the Kakal, have a budget. And Kakal generates the funding. They own 17% of the lands in the state of Israel. And through land sales and I guess rental structures, the revenue from Kakal ends up being something like $1.2 billion, like 6 to 8 billion shekels a year.
Mhm.
So we're talking about over $5 billion for the 5 years subsequent to the meeting of each World Zionist Congress that gets determined by the overall policies that get set by the Congress. And the Congress, um,
So it's not the Israeli
has
government. So you're
it's
saying,
not the Knesset. It's not the Knesset. So it's the largest diaspora delegation to the World Zionist Congress is the American community, and the American community has elections for it. Other world communities don't have elections for it. They determine it in their communal structures somehow. Um, but we have elections. We're Americans. We have elections, and the American Zionist Movement, azm.org. Go there and see, and go to our website, thejewishfuture.org, to see our slate and to see our platform. Um, AZM runs the election, and it's parliamentary, and the Israeli community. There's an Israeli delegation also, and that's based on whatever the balance of the Zionist parties are in the last Knesset election,
okay,
and so that's going to be about 200 delegates from Israel. I think it's 152 delegates from the United States, and I'm running in a new party, the Jewish Future, and we are a centrist slate. And I'll say this: the work of the World Zionist Congress is about how these funds get used for the Zionist movement, how we educate our kids. We want much more of that money to be spent on education of our kids in the American Jewish community. Um, and what happens leading up to that um, is that uh, that work has nothing to do with the policy issues, the geopolitical um, uh, peace, two-state solution, not a two-state solution, and it shouldn't, because those issues really should be left to the Israeli public and their elected officials. So on our slate, we have people who still believe in a two-state solution. We have people who have given up on a two-state solution. We have people who never believed in a two-state solution, but it doesn't matter because a number of us said we got to create a slate that has people who 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 have that range, but are all Zionists, all believe that Zionism is the national liberation movement of the Jewish people, and that the alternative to Jewish sovereignty is Jewish powerlessness. But this work, the Zionist Congress and these national institutions, is not about those issues of peace and diplomacy and the geopolitical issues. It's about something else. So we constructed a list that has people who have a range of those opinions, but have agreed, like, let's work together on how to get resources for our kids' education. This thing,
so just so I get it, just so I have it
yeah,
straight, there's the Israeli government, and Israelis vote in the election for the Israeli government. Then there's this kind of international Zionist conspiracy government, um, which Herzl started and just kept going after the state was founded. And it controls like more than $1 billion a year in
right,
allocations that have a direct impact on American Jewish life, or can have a direct impact.
can have.
Oh,
I
not
don't
for the
think
rest of
it's
his life.
I don't think it's realized its potential to have yet.
And who can vote?
So any any American Jew, any Jew living in the United States as a permanent resident or a citizen who did not vote in the last Knesset election in Israel
Right, because
and
then
who
you're
subscribes to the Jerusalem program, which basic commitments to Zionism and the state of Israel
so like
as a Jewish and democratic state.
so if you're Jewish and you're in America and you're watching this, odds are that you can just go and vote right now.
Yeah, you vote online. You have to pay $5 because it costs money to run the whole election, and also because it makes it uh, safer and more protected from fraud to have people give their
Right, because otherwise you'd have
credit
all
card.
Qatari spam bots taking over
Right.
the election and
Yeah.
voting
Right.
for the horrendous.
Exactly. And $5. AZN.org. And you have to register first and then choose slate number 20. Just choose slate number 20, the Jewish
Okay,
future.
fair enough.
Okay?
Jewish
Just do
future.
that.
That's great. All right, I want to shift gears again. Um, your day job is that you are the president and CEO of the Steinhardt Foundation, Steinhardt Foundation for Jewish Life.
Right.
Can you give me just a real short explanation as to what that is? What distinguishes your foundation from all the? I mean, when I came back to as I was born and raised in the U.S., but I wasn't Jewishly involved in the institutions. I came back for a few years in my adulthood and needed to learn real fast who all of these different organizations were. What sets the Steinhardt Foundation apart, and what is like if you can name a couple of projects that you historically have been involved in, and especially one that's your favorite one that you're currently involved in, just so that we get a sense of what it does.
So, Michael Steinhardt started this foundation in 1994 um, out of a sense that the Jewish community, the organized Jewish community, was just not reaching the vast majority of American Jews with a resonant um, way to connect to being Jewish, and for that matter, to connect to Israel. And this work started with a number of projects. I was hired by the foundation in 1995 to develop the first project of the foundation, which was Makor, which was a center for Jewish New Yorkers in their 20s and 30s on the west side of Manhattan to give people opportunities to connect to each other, to connect to their sense of being Jewish. We did it through a variety of vehicles.
I was
And it
there
was,
once. It was really artsy. It was cool. There are all these young
well,
people, but it's like,
live music cafe featuring a whole range of artists, a lot of Israeli artists we brought in. We discovered we discovered Nora Jones. Her first
get
performances,
out of here.
yeah, were in our and we booked her many Wednesday nights, and her opening big party for her album when it came out was in our space. But we also, had Ehud Banai, and this is back in 1999. Okay.
Wow.
Um, uh, Ehud Banai and uh, a range of Israeli artists. Corinne Allah, all my favorite
That's,
Israeli artists. David Broza played in our space often.
did you say, did you perform? You like singing, right?
I, I, I performed back then. I used to play with a great guy named Seth Glass, and we used to play in the space. Um, but there was a screening room, and there was a lot of, but it was about like you could connect Jewishly, and you could be Jewish through cultural means, through social means. Um, and that was very powerful. At the same time that we were opening Makor, the foundation was working very closely with the Andrea and Charles Bronfman Foundation to start and to design Birthright Israel. And the first trip in December of 1999. That was a breakthrough project, with
Sure. I mean,
Something like 800,000 people have gone on the trip now to date. And the data of measuring the population that has been on the trip in comparison to Jews of very similar profile who didn't go on the trip is stunning. And,
tell
I
me.
started by talking about on Birthright, participants wake up to the idea that, whoa, they're part of a people. Um, it has such deep effect.
For
Um,
example,
um, the difference between those who went on the trip and those of a similar profile who didn't go on the trip in terms of intermarriage, in terms of um, their now we have people who are like have children and have 14-year-old children, um, 20, 25 years later. Um, Stunning differences in terms of um, their decisions to raise their children Jewishly, their decisions to marry other Jews, and their decisions that if they do marry a non-Jew, that the family still considers itself Jewish. Um,
which is new, right? I mean, that wasn't the case 40 years ago, right? Back then,
right.
if you, the reason that intermarriage rates were such a big deal in the Jewish community is because it was seen as this sort of exit. That once
Yeah.
you intermarry, then your kids are not going to be Jewish and you're gone. And today, that's not really so true anymore.
Yeah, I mean, 50 years ago, the majority of people who married somebody who wasn't Jewish, their children, they didn't consider their household to be Jewish, and their children didn't grow up being taught and that they're Jewish. 50 years later, the majority of people who marry someone who isn't Jewish, their children um, do consider themselves to be Jewish, and that's a pivotal shift.
And you
Um,
think birthright probably had something to do with that shift?
I think that started before Birthright. I think Birthright helped that, but the real difference in data is that the majority of of Jews who go on Birthright marry other Jews, um,
Amazing.
and I think it's like a 30-point spread. I could have that a little wrong, but it's a stunning thing. And Michael's vision for this and Charles Bronfman's vision for this were key to getting this done. And it wasn't only about the program content. And first of all, Michael has loved Israel for a very, very long time. I think he first went on a trip to Israel when he was 22 years old. Um, he and then went back every year since, and as deep ties there, and deeply appreciates the vitality and humanity of Israelis and Israeli culture in a very feeling, powerful way, and knows that getting our kids to experience that is essential for them to have a sense of being part of this people, and that the existence of Israel and the reality of Israel is not just some incidental thing. It's just a, oh, one of many ways of the Jewish people expressing itself. It is central and key. So, a program that exposes young people that is very much at the center of our philanthropy and what the Steinhardt family believes in. Um, and for that matter, the Hebrew language has been extremely important. And you know, Michael doesn't speak Hebrew, but he's one of the few philanthropists I know, um, who, even though he himself was never able to really learn the language, he knows how important it is.
So,
Which
so
is
talk a
saying,
little bit about maybe talk a little bit about the Hebrew language program that you're currently involved in, because from what I know about it, it's an amazing thing. I mean, I was writing about why American Jews should study Hebrew maybe 10, 15 years ago, and everybody that I talked to, I published this piece, and everybody I talked to said, "Yeah, well, American Jews, they're not going to learn Hebrew because they're Americans. They don't learn languages." Or it was this sort of brushed off thing, and I kept thinking to myself, imagine what that would do to Israel diaspora relations, to accessing Israeli culture, to sort of accessing some of these kind of deeper spiritual, not in a religious sense, but in a kind of the spirit sense, connections and culture. And this seems right up your alley, right? If you did Makor, which was a cultural, powerful institution, and you did Birthright, which wasn't a religious program, it was a program to help young American Jews kind of deepen their own sense of peoplehood, and you see what's going on that you wrote about in your essay in Jewish education, formal Jewish education, and what's happening in the universities, it seems like Hebrew is, if you could find a way to crack that nut, to figure out what it is that's really the barrier to American Jews in large numbers learning Hebrew, that would be an amazing thing. So, what's your formula?
Um, so we began working in the space of Hebrew language, um, starting in like 2007, with exploring the idea of creating Hebrew language charter schools. And that work has continued to this day, uh, with 10 campuses across the United States, through the Hebrew Public Charter Schools for Global Citizens. We started our first school in Brooklyn, in Hebrew Language Academy Charter School. It opened in 2009. And the idea here, charter schools are public schools that are independently run, independent from the local school district. Um, and
But
so you can have them.
they don't charge like private schools.
They're public schools, so they're funded by
That's
mostly
huge.
by public dollars, but they're independently run, so that they can have a different curriculum, and uh, I mean, they have to meet standards, state standards, and all that, but they can have a different content to their curriculum, and there's a whole history of dual language charter schools, and we saw a Greek dual language charter school in Brooklyn, and there are Spanish dual language charter schools, Russian, Arabic dual language charter schools, and we felt it was important to create Hebrew dual language charter schools. But we asked ourselves the question back when we first had the idea in 2007. Well, what's the best way to teach Hebrew? And we did a whole exploration, and we ended up meeting Vardit Ringwald, who was then a professor at Brandeis University, who had developed a methodology, taking best practices in second language acquisition, which is basically called the proficiency approach, and adapting it to Hebrew. And she, together um, uh, with Arnie and Walt Winchell in Massachusetts, had created a day school, JCDS, Jewish Community Day School, created on this methodology, this model of teaching Hebrew. And we went up there and we brought a team of educators from public schools in New York to look at it, and they said, this is great because it goes together with the way that we want to teach in general. It really, and so we started, and we learned a lot about this methodology of teaching language. It's not about memorizing um, verb paradigms and vocabulary lists. It's about being in the language, interacting in the language. There's a whole methodology that teachers
Yeah.
have to master, by which they draw the learner into the language, completely in the language. But it's not just they just start speaking Hebrew, and they have to do it very carefully. They're only speaking Hebrew, but they have to do it very, very carefully. And so from that, then we expanded it um, to Jewish day camps, and created a program called Kites Cave, Summer of Fun. Um, and now that's both in Jewish day camps and in Jewish overnight camps. And kids in these camps will just have Hebrew 6 hours a day. And their teachers, the counselors, are Israeli young people that work with the Sochnut, with the Jewish agency. They're the shlichim of the Sochnut, who come over, and we train them in Israel first, and they know the methodology. And what's really powerful is that these amazingly idealistic, vibrant Israeli, 19-year-olds, who are the counselors for the kids in these camps, are just amazing role models full of spirit, integrity, and our kids are with them in Hebrew.
Yeah.
So I used the expression before, the the vibrancy and humanity of Israel. I believe that that's captured in the cadences and tones and sounds of modern Israeli Hebrew, and just in a way that you can't just teach about. You have to just
Right.
be in it, and bringing our kids into my all three of my kids went to Hebrew charter school, have been in Hebrew immersion programs in camp, um, and are just very much deeply connected to Israel and Israelis
I mean,
because of all that.
look, I've, as you know, I've met Vardit Ringwald, and I even invited her to also contribute an essay because I thought what she was saying was so important. What blew me away before you even get to the specific methods of language acquisition, the proficiency method, and all of that stuff, there's this sort of baseline reality that when you go to high school in America and you take French classes, those teach or in college and you take Spanish, those teachers are trained teachers of Spanish and French. They have like master's degrees. There's a whole profession, and if you want to learn Hebrew, that's in the synagogue that deals with it. And the teachers very often aren't trained professionals. They're Israelis who happen to need a job, or very, very often the sort of the entire profession of teaching Hebrew hadn't been professionalized really until Vardit came along and said, no, they need to be trained in the cutting edge methods that are the same ones that are used for Spanish and French. I know because I took Spanish at Columbia University just as this proficiency method was starting to be applied. We're talking about like around 1990, and
Right.
right, maybe 88, and it was an amazing method. Like I was learning Spanish quickly because it was kind of this intuitive how children learn kind of method. And so what you're essentially doing is leapfrogging from having Hebrew taught by non-professionals at all, and people wonder why American Jews don't learn Hebrew, leapfrogging over into the most cutting edge methods and training an entire generation of teachers who could actually teach Hebrew
And
the way it's supposed to be taught.
we're doing that, and Bardit is now leading the consortium for the teaching of Hebrew language and culture at Brandeis University, and growing the network of universities that are giving master's degrees in the teaching of Hebrew. She had been the founder of the School of Hebrew at Middlebury College, and we helped to fund a master's degree there, and we're funding a master's degree at Queens College, and we really want to broaden it. But there's another aspect to it, David,
Mhm.
and that's the way that the best practices for learning a language is that you begin with oral proficiency first,
Just
and
like
then
kids.
you move like kids, like your infant is hearing your language spoken to them before they're reading anything. They're hearing. It's very emotional. The connection to parents, to mother around language is very emotional and powerful. They start to understand. They only start to speak a bit later, maybe a year old. When do they start to read? But here's the thing: in most of our day schools, yeshivas, how do we teach Hebrew? We start with literacy first. We want them to read, the aleph and the honey, right? Before they're really speaking, because those institutions, for the most part, are not teaching modern spoken Israeli Hebrew as primary. They want the letters first. They want them to get the aleph, before having this kind of proficiency, um, and, and this approach, whatever language you're teaching for it, is about the oral proficiency first. Well, guess what? The the reality of the existence of a Hebrew speaking society in the land of Israel, in the state of Israel, should have completely turned that around, 75 years ago. Um, because the teaching of Hebrew, the Hebrew language is a vibrant, spoken, living language now. It's not only a language of text. The Jewish people preserved the Hebrew language with great genius in exile by preserving it as a written language, as a text of legal documents and religious texts. And the fact that we did that expresses our genius of preserving ourselves and our culture. But we were doing that to wait for a day when we can begin to speak it again in the land, to bring it fully alive. And all these Jewish educational institutions just haven't gotten the memo that happened, and
Right.
they're still teaching
Right. But
Hebrew as if we're still as an exilic language and not a sovereign uh, as not a sovereign language.
but that sort of ridiculous decades or generations long gap between changes in reality and adaptation on the part of Jewish institutions that you just described with Hebrew language, it's the same delay as when did American Jewish institutions figure out that we're not a faith community and that we're actually a people, and that it's okay to say that in America. It seems like American, like each generation of American Jews, their institutions become like ossified and stuck in whatever battles they're fighting. And they pass that on unthinkingly to next generations. And even as the world radically changes around them, they don't change. And then all of a sudden, October 7th hits. All of a sudden, there's anti-Semitism everywhere. All of a sudden, they find themselves lacking core, not just institutions, but operational principles, and even the core beliefs, if that's the right word, or to even know who you are, right? To even know who you are, and so each of these projects that you talk about, whether it's Makor, which introduces being Jewish as a high level cultural in person experience, or Birthright, which suddenly introduces young American Jews to the reality of peoplehood and of this and of sovereignty, and in its intense 10-day thing that changes their life, as often as not. And Hebrew language as well. And you're basically saying, oh, and in some ways, also voting in the Zionist election also fits into this. In some ways, you're saying the world is different. The Jewish world and your Jewish identity, they're fundamentally different than what you've been taught all your life. We're not going to go where we see demand. We're going to assume that the problem in a lot of these things is a problem of supply, that it's not that American Jews don't want to learn Hebrew because they're Americans. It's American Jews don't want to learn Hebrew because nobody's bringing it to them the way that languages need to be taught if they're going to get an audience and have people successfully acquire a language. So I see what you're describing in all of its different pieces as like one bold move after another to try to shake the tree of the American Jewish experience so they can actually have the tools it needs to grapple with the new challenges in a new post October 7th
and,
world.
and to create what I like to call Jewish cultural sovereignty in relationship to the political sovereignty of the centrality of the state of Israel. And and another thing about our platform for the Jewish Future slate for the World Zionist Congress elections,
Which you
we
can vote
want
on by going to azm.org, is that right?
yeah, up until through May 4th. Do this by May 4th. Um, Another thing about it is that we want that $1.2 billion a year. We want a sizable amount of it to be spent on 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 the teaching of Hebrew, and we specifically want to open up the idea of approaching public school districts in communities that have large numbers of Jewish kids going to public school. The vast majority of American Jewish kids go to public school. They don't go to Jewish day schools. I mean, my kids have gone to Jewish day school, but we're always thinking about Klal Yisrael, the full experience of Jews, and not just our own anecdotal experience. We want Hebrew to be offered as a foreign language option in public middle schools and high schools in the affluent suburbs that we find many Jews living in.
It should be. It's
And
a great language. Why should you
and
go
and
there?
and the resources of the national institutions of the Zionist movement should very much help to
Sure.
pay for it. It's really essential that happens. So that's something that we want to really push for.
I think that's great, and kol hakavod, as we say in Israel, on all of these different uh, endeavors. And listen, thank you so much for the time you've taken for this conversation. I could keep going for another hour if you'd like, but
Sure, let's go. Let's do it.
maybe part two. Well, it's pretty late here, but thank you so much. Really, thank you for all you do, and thank you for your time, Rabbi David Gedzelman, um, CEO and president of the Steinhardt Foundation for Jewish Life, and head of the Jewish Future List in the Zionist organization, the World Zionist Organization elections, and author of the essay "Teach the Idea of the Jewish People" that appears in Jewish Priorities. Thank you so much, and take care.
Thank you so much.